In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Thank you for tuning into Justice for Birth Mothers. My name is Anna Kavanagh, co-founder and convener to the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice, Ireland's largest non-Tusla funded group advocating on behalf of birth mothers in difficulty with Tusla, the Gardaí and the family court. The mothers that we support are bound by the in-camera rule, which means they could be jailed for speaking outside the family court about what's happening to them. To overcome the silencing of these birth mothers and give them a voice, I interviewed 20 of them that I've personally come to know since our group was formed in 2019. They volunteered to describe their experiences in great detail to let the world know about the ongoing state abuse of mothers and children in Ireland. The voices you're about to hear are the voices of the women who offered to read the transcripts of what was said to me. I want to warn you in advance that you will probably be disturbed by what you're about to hear. This podcast is the 17th in the series Justice for Birth Mothers. We begin with Michelle Monaghan, the lead researcher with the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice. She has been examining some of the data relating to the removal of newborn babies in Ireland by Tusla.
In January, the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice made an FOI request to Tusla under the Freedom of Information Act 2014, seeking data on the number of newborn babies taken into care each year since 2018. In its response on the 18th of January, we were advised that Tusla doesn't record the number of newborn babies that they take into care. Instead, they record the number of children under 1 year old taken into care. The data that they provided us with shows a 11% increase in the number of children under a year old taken into care between 2018 and 2022. There was 109 children under a year old taken into care in 2018 and 121 taken into care in 2022. Interestingly, the number of children under a year old taken into care in 2020 during the pandemic fell to 104. The data for 2023 is not available until the middle of this year. Since the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice was formed in 2019, we have been contacted by a disproportionate number of mothers from Cork and Limerick whose babies were taken into care at birth. Data released by Tusla in response to a PQ on our behalf in March 2020 from Deputy Mattie McGrath to then Minister for Children Catherine Sapone on the number of children taken into state care in each of Tusla's 17 service areas 2016 to 2020 revealed a disproportionate number of children taken into care by Tusla in their Cork and Midwest service area that covers Limerick City. The most recent data shows that this pattern has continued. New figures provided to the Irish Mail on Sunday in January shows almost a quarter of children now in state care were removed from families in Cork and the Midwest, despite these areas accounting for just 15% of the country's population. Reporter Debbie McCann noted that Sligo, Leitrim and West Cavan had the lowest number of children in care relative to the size of their population. Approximately a third of children in care come from Dublin, which broadly matches the percentage of the population.
Behind all of these figures and data lies children whose lives have been destroyed for life. During the report stage on the Mother and Baby Institutions Payment Scheme Bill that took place on the 2nd of February 2023, Deputy Richard Boyd Barrett spoke on the primal wound of separating a mother from their child at birth.
Minister, I'm an adoptee, as you know. I was born in a mother and baby home. I was in a couple of them, actually, because I was sent off to England to be ushered out of sight. child of a fallen woman, illegitimate child. That's how mothers and the children were characterised, and then brought back. I don't even know how long I was in a mother and baby home. I don't know. And it's irrelevant whether you were 1 week, 1 day, 6 months, or 2 years, because the central crime that church and state committed was the primal wound of separating a mother from their child, which has, from the minute that it happens, a lifelong effect on mother and child. A lifelong effect. It is the primal wound that begins on day one. And in some cases, and I have to say, I always say it, my story turned out to be lucky. I eventually was reunited with my mother and I was adopted by a wonderful family. But the truth is, whether your story and what happened was terrible, and for some it was terrible, absolutely terrible, all of their lives, they suffered all of their lives because of that primal wound inflicted by church and state, but every one of them, whether they were boarded out, suffered abuse, mothers forced to work essentially as slaves, shamed all their life, the stigma of illegitimacy, whatever it was to a greater or lesser extent, everybody had a crime committed against them from day one when they were torn out of the arms of their mother, or the mother had their child torn out of their arms. And now we have a league table and arbitrary exclusions. A failure to acknowledge the individual specific suffering that some people may have suffered because of being boarded out, because of discrimination, because of their mixed race, or whatever it is shocking, and still no justification.
Motherhood is hard, support the mother and the child together. Do not tear this love asunder. Support, respect the mother. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
I tried to interview a number of mothers whose newborn babies were taken at birth, but it was so traumatising and they became so upset it would have been unethical to continue with the interviews. However, I did manage to interview 2 ladies, Nora and Tammy. Nora is a professional lady whose relationship with her partner broke down when she became pregnant. This caused her great mental anguish and she went for counselling. Her counsellor then notified Tusla, and Nora now explains the torture and torment throughout her pregnancy and afterwards as a result of Tusla's intervention.
In fairness, the social workers in the hospital were very supportive. There was no problem there. I believe that the referral was put in when I was around 6 or 7 months pregnant at the time. But fortunately for me, with the delays for Christmas, they didn't get involved until the last few weeks of my pregnancy. The phone calls from Tusla were harrowing and caused me huge distress. So I basically got a call from their social work department. They sounded friendly enough in the beginning, and it was just basically, we need to get hold of your medical records. That's all we need. We'll let you get on with the rest of your pregnancy. Sign off your name on this and you won't hear from us again, that kind of thing. So I thought, okay, I was legally advised to play ball, and I thought, okay, that doesn't sound too bad, so I did. The next thing I know, after doing that, it was constant harassment. They started contacting my parents and my sister. They were speaking to my mother. They told her that they were going to probably put my child into foster care as soon as it was born and not to worry, but they'd give me supervised access to my baby. My mum said there was no way she wanted anything like that to happen, that she would take my baby or my sister could take the baby. They refused even to consider this option. They just wanted the baby, and that was that. My GP was very supportive. He'd known me for 20 years. He spoke to Tusla and advocated for me and said he had no concerns whatsoever about me having the child. the child should remain with its mother. The only thing on their agenda was foster care. And I mean, how could they make a judgment of me? They didn't even know me. They knew little or nothing about me, and we weren't even allowed to have the chance of being a mother. It just seemed like separating the mother from the child was their whole plan. And my medical records were basically stuff when I was a teenager. I suffered from depression when I was a teenager. I didn't go into too much detail because I didn't want to be identified that I had suffered from depression. There was no grounds for them planning to take my baby when it was born. My GP was standing up for me strongly. Looking back, it's kind of scary to think they can use this to take your baby, any excuse at all. I mean, they were trying something that happened to me 15 years previously to take my baby. It's scary to think that that stigma about mental health stays with you for a long time and can be used against you. The phone calls were non-stop, and I got a phone call from a social worker to say that the only way I could avoid my baby being taken and put into foster care was if I agreed to go to Bessborough Mother and Baby Home. At this stage I was like, whatever it takes to hold on to my baby and stop it from being put into foster care. So off I went to Bessborough House. I had a very bad feeling when I drove out there. I have to say, in fairness, the staff were very nice. You could tell that they were thinking, there's no need for all of this. Thankfully, because Bessborough House, there was a chance I could keep my baby. They said they wouldn't be having me as a resident after my baby was born, and as I would become institutionalised. That was very scary. Instead, they were going to send me out to social workers from my family to supervise me. You could tell the social worker was furious about this suggestion. This is what Bessborough House were putting into place, so they couldn't really do anything about it. And yes, I was kind of happy to go along with Bessborough House because it was blocking Tusla from my baby. You see, the staff in Bessborough House were not happy with the pressure the social worker was putting me under. I have no doubt because of all the pressure that Tusla were putting me under, the baby did not go full term. I was so stressed. I went into premature labour. My baby had to be induced. I believed if I hadn't been put under this intense pressure from a social worker, my baby would have been gone full term and I wouldn't have been so stressed. I would have had a normal labour. I know that Tusla put my baby in danger because of the constant harassments and threats. Why can't you let a mother have a bit of peace? She's pregnant. All the torture they put mothers through when they're pregnant, maybe for the rest of their lives. They're supposed to be professionals. Why can't they see that putting babies in danger before they're born? Within a 2-day of my baby being born, I got a call from my mother saying Tusla was going to take the baby into nighttime foster care if we couldn't find a nanny. That came as a total shock, as we hadn't worked out the care plan with Bessborough House. The social worker was adamant to find a new way of getting my baby into state care. She was insisting that it had to be a qualified nurse that had to stay in our house overnight. She knew this was going to cost a huge amount of money, and I guess she thought we wouldn't be able to come up with the money. Luckily for me, my family all chipped in to get the funds to find somebody. The social worker was insistent that it had to be a fully qualified nurse and nothing else. So we were desperately looking for somebody. Just one day before I was going to be discharged with my baby from the hospital. I was only after giving birth. It was a difficult labour. It was my first baby and the pressure was on me. It was horrendous. If we couldn't get a night nurse within 24 hours, my baby was going into foster care. Thankfully, thank God, we managed to get a nurse and I avoided my baby going into foster care. Harassment, the torture, the constant torment didn't end there. In fairness to social workers at Bessborough who were coming to the house to supervise me, they were very nice and supportive. I had no problems with them at all. Within a few days of my daughter coming home, the next thing you know, the social worker comes to the house and she goes, "We're going to look for a supervision order." I knew nothing about the court system. I'd never been to court and I didn't know. So the next thing you know, I'm being dragged to court. I'm trying to breastfeed my daughter. There were so many interruptions with them coming to the house. The social worker made it awkward for me. It meant that I was going to drive nearly 2 hours to the court, not to the local court, and I'd be away from my daughter for so long. She mentions supervision orders. She said there's no need for me to explain. Sure, you know yourself what it means. All you have to do is be in court and say yes to the supervision order. Looking back now, I got very bad advice from legal aid. I went to court without my own solicitor. I was trying to find a solicitor at short notice. I'd just given birth. I couldn't even think straight. I was trying my best to cooperate with them and play ball in the hope they would go away and leave me and my baby alone. The sad thing, it was only when court was ordered, I was given a copy of the supervision order, that I fully realised what it entailed. I'd never been allowed to read it before I went into court. The social worker should have arranged for me to read it, either in the social work department or wherever, but I should have had a chance to see what was in it. This was another trickery of theirs. There are so many lies. It said that I'd moved 17 times during my pregnancy. That was not true. They said I was involved in a crime. In fact, I was the victim of a crime. It will surely give away my identity, so I'm not going to say anything else about that. The other thing, which was inaccurate about my age, trying to make me look an awful lot older than I actually am. And yeah, it was full of lies, and I could see the judge granted it. Yes, they played on my mental health issues and things like that. So yeah, me and my mother got the impression that Bessborough House wasn't too happy about them going to court for a supervision order and that it wasn't necessary. The supervision order on me was so much pressure and it was so intrusive on my family. We went along with everything. We were getting visits from the social workers. We were getting visits from Bessborough House 2 or 3 times a week. They were pleasant enough. I had no problems with them. They would try and support you and encourage you. Tusla workers were different, very different. They were constantly making threats to me. They would say things to me like, you're going to have to accept down the line your baby is going to go into foster care. So how truly can you really bond with your baby when you think she's going to be snatched away from you? This went on until my daughter was 2.5 and eventually they closed the case. Me and my family jumped through every hoop to make sure they couldn't take my baby. It was a huge amount of money that we didn't have. This should never happen. I'm so grateful that I had the support of my mother and family. Just imagine what would happen if I didn't have their support.
Look into your mother's face. No one else can take her place. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Journalist Debbie McCann recently reported in the Mail on Sunday the saga of a pregnant woman who fled to Northern Ireland after learning Tusla was preparing to take her unborn baby into care. This mother is now living independently with her 3-year-old child in Belfast. According to documents seen by the Irish Mail on Sunday, the woman's older children were removed from her care after an expert witness brought in by the state's Child and Family Agency to assist their case told the family court she had the minimum cognitive capacity required to manage the demands of parenting. However, an assessment by a clinical psychologist in the North, conducted 4 years later, found she has an average IQ and scored above average in her processing speed index. The mother's other children were removed from her care after her former partner assaulted their youngest baby. A court heard how the mother was out of the house at the time of the incident, and the judge in the case noted how she suffered because of the actions of her violent ex-partner. Speaking to the Mail on Sunday about her case, the mother, who is now aged in her 30s, said her baby daughter was put into an induced coma after being hurt by her then partner, and that she agreed to an interim care order while the assault was being investigated. The mother was refused help by Tusla a few days before the assault occurred. The woman said that a year after agreeing to the interim care order for her baby daughter, they, Tusla, went for interim care orders on her other children too. She told the Mail on Sunday, "I was told the children can't go home because of domestic violence. This was despite the fact he was completely gone from the home. the Gardaí actually had to tell the social worker, "I'm not under investigation, my ex-partner is." They told the social worker he was the one who hurt my baby, but Tusla claimed it didn't add up. The Gardaí told them I was never arrested and they had video evidence of me leaving the house and coming back and running out with my baby for help. But Tusla kept using it against me. The mother fought desperately to get her children back, but she claims Tusla were determined she was susceptible to violent relationships and had a cognitive learning difficulty. The mother subsequently entered a relationship with another man and found out she was pregnant again. She asked to go to a mother and baby home where she could be supported to keep her baby, but instead her newborn son was taken from her at 5 days old. Hospital notes seen by the Mail on Sunday show she was breastfeeding her baby and continued to pump breast milk after he was removed from her care. The mother recalled they took him at 5 days old out the back door of the maternity hospital because I couldn't meet his needs, because I was susceptible to domestic violent relationships and apparently had a cognitive learning difficulty. I begged to go to a mother and baby home, but I was told no. His father was willing to go, but they said no. She added, "We broke up as a result of all of this." When the woman subsequently became pregnant again, she resolved to do everything in her power to keep her baby. She travelled to Belfast 3 years ago and presented at the Health and Social Care Trust. She was then placed in a mother and baby unit and passed all the assessments Tusla said she had failed. The woman is now living independently with her 3-year-old toddler and is a support mother to another vulnerable woman. She told the Mail on Sunday, "I got pregnant again during COVID and the pre-birth assessment was done over the phone." She added that when she went to Tusla and asked whether this time they would put her into Bessborough, a mother and baby home. However, the mother claimed that this request was refused because it would be a waste of Tusla's money. She continued, "I decided to go to Northern Ireland because I knew my baby would be taken off me, and I presented myself to the trust up there and I had my baby. I was supported. I was put into a mother and baby assessment unit up here and I passed all my assessments that Tusla said I had failed, and they eventually closed my case." The mother said that despite being free to live independently with her son in Belfast, Tusla will not allow her other children who were removed from her care to live with her. They say they have been in care too long and it will be too upsetting. "I'm in contact with my older children and my 3-year-old is living with me, but I've no contact with my other children who are in care." Barbara Scanlon from the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice group supported the mother throughout her last pregnancy. Speaking about the case, she told the Mail on Sunday, "I just feel that in the South, from the day she was pregnant with the baby, she was never going to be allowed to keep him. At case conferences, there was never a discussion about supporting her. The decision was always about taking him straight from the hospital and putting him into foster care. They're both doing really well and they've closed their cases here, which proves there was never an issue. It's so sad she could drive a couple of hours over the border and have such a different experience. I think she should have all of her children with her, but she doesn't." In response to queries from the Mail on Sunday in relation to the woman's case, a spokesperson for Tusla said, "Their main priority is the safety and well-being of children and young people." She said, "Internationally, Tusla has a lower level of children in care in comparison to our neighbours in Northern Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales, including for babies under 1 year old. Tusla also prioritises the return home of children in care at the earliest possible opportunity. Tusla will only place an unborn child on the Child Protection Notification System, the CPNS, where there is an assessed risk of significant harm for the baby when it will be born. Removing an infant is a last resort and only considered when all other means of ensuring the child's safety have been exhausted." These claims made by Tusla to the Mail on Sunday run counter to our experience in the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice. The mothers who have spoken to us say that social workers have gone out of their way to sever the bond between them and their newborn babies.
If you have any doubt that Tusla social workers take newborn babies hours after birth, have a listen to Kerry Hession, a social care worker with Orchard Fostering, who had this to say in an interview with Marion McGowan on Athlone Today on Athlone Community Radio.
There's no exact figure. A child could come in care from a day old. A child could come into care at 17 years of age.
A day old? My goodness.
Yes, they could come in at a very, very young age. And I suppose, depending on the circumstances in which they come in, it depends how long they're going to stay in care, whether it's going to be short-term, long-term, and what the court order is for that child. Yeah.
Okay.
Give the mothers back their children. Give the children back to the mother. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Research shows that babies taken at birth will suffer lifelong adverse effects. In an opinion piece in the Irish Examiner on February 9th, Dr. Catherine Conlon, a HSC public health doctor, wrote, "The less touch we have in our lives, the greater the likelihood of anxiety, depression and stress. Touch has been found to calm agitation and slow down our heartbeat. Human touch can lower blood pressure as well as cortisol, the stress hormone. It also triggers the happy hormone oxytocin, which promotes emotional bonding. Experiments have influenced the way babies are cared for in neonatal units using a protocol called kangaroo mother care, placing the newborns against their mother's bare chests as soon as possible after birth and keeping them there for many hours at a time. Babies held skin to skin have immediate access to breast milk and can absorb protective microorganisms. A paper published in Early Human Development 2008 showed that skin-to-skin contact in even the first hours after birth have been shown to help regulate newborns' temperature, heart rate and breathing and decrease crying. Infants cannot survive without human touch. One of the best-known studies on the science of touch, Carlson and Earls, 1997, examined the impact of sensory deprivation in understaffed orphanages in Romania. The latest research looks at the long-term effect of severe institutional sensory deprivation on orphans adopted into nurturing families. The researchers found that in a group of young adults who had been adopted into British families, there were changes in brain volume linked to their early life deprivation, statistically associated with lower IQ and greater attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD symptoms. This evidence is relevant to the millions of children worldwide who continue to live in non-familial institutions where they can be deprived of sensory stimulation and therefore at risk of enduring lifelong effects. Psychology professor at the University of California, Dacher Keltner, who has spent over 15 years teaching and supervising research in the science of touch, says that touch is our earliest and fundamental language of social connection. According to Keltner, humans are believed to have used tactile communication before we began figuring out speech. Touch is now thought to be the first sensation a fetus perceives. At birth and during the initial moments of life, it is an infant's most critical and fully developed sense. The way babies start exploring the world, developing confidence, learning where their bodies end and everything else begins. The Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice is very concerned that in our experience of supporting mothers whose newborn babies have been taken into state care, Tusla social workers display zero awareness or understanding of the effects of their behaviour and actions on either the mother or the baby before and after birth.
Tusla used domestic violence as the excuse to remove Tammy's children. When she entered into a new relationship and became pregnant, Tusla removed this newborn baby. Tammy describes what she went through.
They got a referral at 12 weeks from the hospital because I was a past victim of domestic violence. So I was red flagged straight away. My children were in care. I got a phone call after 2 weeks of the referral going to the local Tusla office. And from 16 weeks until the baby was born at 40 weeks, the only way to explain what they put me through was a nightmare. I got constant phone calls, constant text messages, and basically, I just don't know how to explain it. I felt harassed by Tusla. Every time I went to a hospital appointment, they were notified if I was sick. And in hospital, I had the hospital social worker coming down talking to me in front of the other patients. There was an instance, I was in for up to 12 weeks because I had heavy bleeding on the baby. And every day for 12 weeks, except for a Saturday and Sunday, I had a hospital social worker involved. The social worker for the baby came to the hospital for a meeting to say that they were opening up a case, saying they were doing a pre-birth assessment. So it was just a nightmare. The pre-birth assessment then led to the removal of my son at 5 days old. There was a meeting before the baby was born where I was completely outnumbered and nobody to give my side of the story. There were 3 social workers, my GP on the phone, the hospital social workers, and basically anyone that was involved in my pregnancy. In the end, the recommendation was that my baby was to be removed from me because I was a past victim of domestic violence. I was blamed for the domestic violence, even though my former partner was in jail, convicted and serving a sentence for domestic violence. They accused me of failing to protect my children from the violence. They said that they couldn't guarantee that I would keep my baby safe. Shortly after the baby was born, I got a summons to court. My baby was born on a Sunday. My solicitor rang me up on the Monday morning and told me to present myself to the court on Wednesday morning. At this stage, the social workers had already told the baby's father that if he ended the relationship with me, they would organise for him to get custody of the baby, otherwise the baby was going to be taken into care. As soon as my baby was born, they put an alarm on him. His file was marked Tusla baby with a big label on the cover. This was very traumatic. I wasn't allowed to leave the ward with my baby when he was going down to neonatal for injections. I was supervised round the clock by a nurse in case I did a runner from the hospital with my baby. Other members of staff then that were coming over changeover of midwives were asking, why is your baby going into care? You're constantly saying to them, look, we're in a public ward, I'm not going to talk about it. So I went down to court. It was Wednesday and it was a criminal court setting the same day. It wasn't a family court sitting day. I felt like I was a criminal. I was breastfeeding my son. So I had to pump my breast milk in front of a lot of people. There was no privacy. My solicitor advised me the best option would be to agree to a 21-day interim care order for my child. So me thinking, okay, she's my legal team, I will agree to it. So I agreed to it. The social worker stood up and said I had another 24 hours to spend with my son before I had to hand him over to Tusla. So all that night, nurses were in and out. I wasn't allowed to close my curtain when I was breastfeeding him. I had to keep my curtains open. Early that morning, a midwife came down to me and they told me to get my son ready for handover, that the social workers would be there to collect him at 2 o'clock. And she said this in front of the full ward. So I had to express as much milk as I could for my son to go with him. And I washed him and got him dressed and I put him into his car seat ready to go. At 5 to 2, the hospital social worker and a security guard came up to tell me that the social workers were downstairs waiting for my son. He was taken out through the back door of the hospital to a waiting car by 2 social workers. So I had to strap him into the car myself and kiss him goodbye. I was given no updates over the weekend, and it was the next week before I saw him again. So when I went back up to the ward, I was discharged and I had to leave the hospital without my baby. In the weeks that followed, I had to keep expressing my milk. I bought bottles and cooler bags. and I froze the breast milk, making sure there was enough milk until I could see my son again, which was every second day. So I got to see him 3 times a week for an hour and a half. And then they said that I couldn't keep breastfeeding my son because they claimed that my breast milk was making him sick. Before that, it was constant going round and round. One social worker collected 3 days' milk and forgot about it and left it in her car so that he couldn't have it. The social worker is deliberately setting out to break the bond between me and my son. I begged, I pleaded with Tusla to let me go to a mother and baby home, and they said no. I used to breastfeed him during access, and one contact worker said, no, you can't do that here. In the weeks after my son was taken, it was like being in a black hole all the time. I was here, but I wasn't really here. When my mother would call over to see me, I just couldn't talk to her. Like, you don't know whether you're coming or going. You're constantly worried. Is my baby safe? Is he going to be sick after his injections? You just don't know what to do with yourself. You feel ashamed. You feel afraid to go outside because you're thinking people knew I was pregnant, but now I have no baby.
One sound you don't want to hear is the cry of the mother and her child taken from her. Justice for birth mothers, oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Former social worker turned academic, Professor Karen Broadhurst is the UK's leading researcher on children in care. She is a founder member of the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory in the University of Lancaster. She designed and led the high-profile Born into Care series, which is driving more humane and compassionate practice in child protection at birth. She chairs the board of trustees for the organisation Reform, which aims to improve the lives of mothers living apart from their children. The researchers led by Professor Broadhurst for the Born into Care series found that when they interviewed the mothers, they consistently described an acute sense of grief, loss and isolation following their babies being taken away. Suicidal thoughts were common, and in the majority of cases, women described self-harming behaviour such as excessive drinking, drug taking, and negative intimate relationships. Women who had babies taken away by the courts were found to be in a worse position than before and had few avenues of help to which they could turn. Cases in which women had babies removed very close to birth, 60% of which were repeat cases, were reported to be particularly traumatic. Often mothers did not know of or understand plans for the removal of their babies. When the research team looked for dates of the statutory pre-birth conference, they found these were typically held very late in the pregnancy, confirming women's accounts of poor planning around removals at birth.
Recently, I spent a morning with Majella Moynihan, who gave me a first-hand account of what it's like to have your baby taken at birth. Majella was born in County Cork, the fifth of 5 children. When her mother died in a car accident, Majella and her sisters were placed in a residential home run by nuns. A year after Majella became a Bangarda, she gave birth to her son David in May 1984 and was forced to give him up for adoption. He was whisked away the moment she gave birth without ever giving her a chance to hold him, to see him or to cuddle him. She was then charged with the breach of Garda discipline for having sex and giving birth outside of marriage. So I suppose, Majella, you are in a very unique position to be able to describe now for us what it's like in the aftermath, in the days and months afterwards. So obviously you gave birth, your baby is taken, you're lactating, all of that. Can you take us through what you can remember of those days just immediately after the birth?
Yes, of course I can. I left the hospital on the 1st of June, which wasn't even 24 hours after my son was born. And of course I was lactating, and it was... I was out of my body. If that's an experience, that's a... you know, people might say that's a cliche. It isn't a cliche. I lived outside of my body because I wasn't able to cope with what was going on within me. My head, I didn't know. I never gave anybody permission to take my son. I never signed any paper that my son was to be taken. Lactating and all of that emotion after having a baby, I had nobody to speak to. So I was very alone in this world, and then being castigated as a member of An Garda Síochána and being told that I had discredited the Garda force. There was enough going on my head after losing my baby being taken, more so. And that feeling of loss, and that feeling of isolation, and that feeling of how alone I was in the world, and that there was no organisation, nobody available to help me. The social workers didn't want to know how I was feeling. Cura had no interest in me at that stage because they had my son. And the Garda Síochána were further instigating proceedings against me, which I wasn't aware of at that time. Looking back now, and this may sound very severe, but I contemplated death because I wasn't able to cope. I was mentally traumatized, physically broken, emotionally starved. I was lost.
Motherhood is hard, support the mother and the child together. Do not tear this love asunder. Support, respect the mother. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.
Justice for Birth Mothers is a co-production between the Alliance of Birth Mothers Campaigning for Justice and M-Compass Media. The podcast series received no funding and is made possible by a team of volunteers. Pseudonyms have been used to protect the identities of the birth mothers. We're grateful to these mothers who shared their stories to highlight the ongoing state abuse of mothers by Tusla, some Gardaí and the family court system. Thanks also to the ladies who read the transcripts, which were very difficult for them given the harrowing stories. Thank you for listening, and please share this podcast with your family, friends and contacts. The next podcast in the series features an interview with Majella Moynihan, whom you've just heard. Until next time, Bannocht de Arif Galer.
In the land where I was born, there are now women seeking justice. Justice for birth mothers. Oh Lord, hear my prayer.